Training camp is officially here for the Cleveland Browns as they kick off their 2025 NFL season. We are here to discuss the Browns rookie class and our expectations for them as we begin the new season. Season 9 of the Dawgland podcast begins right now. Hey, Browns fans, I'm Anthony Joki. He's Jack McCurry. Welcome to another season of the Dawgland podcast. And Cleveland Browns training camp starts today, so we are ready to jump in here and talk to you about some Browns football. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the rookie class and our expectations for them. Jack, another season of Browns football. We ready to roll on out here?
Yes, sir, man. I can't believe it. It's already here. This is season 9 for us, which is still amazing that we are still rolling with this. And we are ready to bring all our listeners and viewers, because we can't forget the YouTube crowd, another exciting season, hopefully exciting season of Cleveland Browns football.
Absolutely. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and like and comment on the video as well. Greatly appreciate it if you would do that. But we're going to talk about the rookies here as we get started with this new season. And we'll start with their first overall selection, Mason Graham out of Michigan. And, Jack, this defensive line, there's still questions about it. Obviously, you have Myles Garrett. That's not a question at all because you know what you can expect from him. But the other three positions on the defensive line are kind of up for grabs, I would say, in terms of how the pecking order is going to be. What are your expectations for Mason Graham as we begin this new season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this pick and Graham will be scrutinized because of what happened on draft night back in April. Obviously, we all kind of were hoping it was going to be Travis Hunter at 2, and then they make the trade with Jacksonville, which was a good trade. Obviously, netting their first round pick next year, which could potentially be high just because kind of like the Browns, Jacksonville has been one of the football purgatories over the last 20 so years. Um, Obviously they have expectations and they, with Trevor Lawrence and that and everybody down there and now Travis Hunter. But when it comes to Graham, obviously we know he was one of the best players overall in the draft. We know the Browns have tried to find long-term solutions at defensive tackle over the last couple of years, whether it was in the draft, whether it was spending money in free agency like Sheldon Richardson years ago. Most recently, Dalvin Tomlinson, obviously he had a good run. And they parted ways with him in the offseason. So now it's Mason Graham pairing him up with vets like Malik Collins, who we added in free agency, and Shelby Harris, as well as Mike Hall, who's entering year 2. But just focusing on Graham specifically, because I do think that D tackle room is deep. You kind of wonder how much uh, snaps is he going to get a game because it's a stacked room, because they invested heavily in Malik Collins. You think he's penciled in as a starter. So does Graham start right away? Does he, ease in and they let Shelby Harris start? It'll be interesting, in terms of production, thanks to, the powerful tools, Anthony, we have with AI, was able to look and see what an average first round defensive tackle has done in the last decade. And you're looking at 32 tackles, 3 sacks, and less than a third or a little more than a third of a forced fumble. So you kind of look at that statistically and you say that's not, people are kind of like, oh, that doesn't seem very productive. But like outside of Aaron Donald and Quinnen Williams, and I think even Quinnen Williams started slow, defensive tackles don't make an impact often in year 1. It's usually like once they start to grow more into their NFL bodies and, dedicating themselves to the weight room, then you see more production there. But it'll be interesting just because there is a deep D tackle room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully believe like you can ease them into this. And when you have Jim Schwartz as your defensive coordinator, he likes to rotate a lot of the defensive line constantly anyway. So, while he might not play 75% of the snaps. I would get tend to think early on it'd probably be about maybe 40%, maybe 50% kind of in there, rotating with these other guys as long as there's not an injury that forces them to play him more. But I feel like as we start off the season, it's going to be a slow easing process. Um, you know, when Mike Hall came back from the suspension last year, it was kind of the same way. Kind of ease him into it, and as they went further towards the end of the season, he was able to be a little bit more productive. So I feel like they're going to take the same approach with Mason Graham. And like I said, because Schwartz is your defensive coordinator, and he likes to rotate guys, it's just going to come naturally.
Yeah, I mean, when you looked at what he did in Michigan, he, obviously wasn't like a dominant pass rusher. He was just an all-around solid defensive tackle. He was great against the run. He could generate pressure. The last 2 years, he had 29 pressures in 2023, 34 pressures in 2024. He had 9 total sacks in that span, according to Pro Football Focus. So this is a guy that's going to come in and obviously like he's going to have to adjust, to the NFL game, both the physicality part, the mental part. But I mean, if he's as good as he was at Michigan and he played against alongside some great defensive linemen, played against some tough offensive lines in the Big Ten. Like you would hope he'll be somewhat of an impact guy in year one. Obviously, he was a top 5 pick, so you expect him to come out and be somewhat of a force. And I think playing alongside Myles Garrett and a Malik Collins, I think that's going to help him ease into the NFL game. Learning from Collins and Harris, 2 solid veterans in that defensive tackle room. It's going to come. I think he's going to have his bumps, but I do think he can come in and make an impact from day one. I think he was just that good in college, and I think it will translate to the NFL level.
Yeah, early on, he's going to get some really good work in because they have joint practices with Philadelphia and Carolina, teams with both really good offensive lines. So I feel like, in those weeks of training camp, it's going to be a good measuring stick of, where he fits in with the rest of this defensive line.
Oh yeah, without question. I mean, Carolina, they're building that offensive line. They've done it through the draft, through free agency. It's solid there in the middle. And then you go to Philly, and we know how great their offensive lines have been over the last several years, and it's one of the biggest reasons why they've been 2-time Super Bowl champions in the last 8, 9 years. Like those are good tests early on. I think like hopefully, our media when they go to these joint practices, they're watching Mason Graham to see how is he going to be physically wise against those offensive lines in the 11 on 11 and the 1-on-1 drills, just to see like does he look like he could be an impact guy early on. And it may not, he may not show it right away, but at the same time, defensive tackle is one of those positions where you don't get like day one instant impact guys. Some of those guys, it takes time. Hopefully the fan base can be patient. We know they won't be, just because it's the Cleveland way. But overall, I think, Graham has a chance to just ease into the pro game, but with his tools, Anthony, I think he could be an impact guy uh, as the 2025 season progresses.
It definitely has the opportunity to be a solid cornerstone on that defensive line. Let's stick with the defense here and move on to their second round pick. One of them, Carson Schwesinger, and with JOK being sidelined for this season, I would imagine they were going to bring Schwesinger along, and slowly ease him into things. But with the JOK injury, and it could have been why they drafted him in the first place at that position, because they kind of may have had an idea of what was going to be going on with JOK. Taking him early in the second round, it's certainly an opportunity for him to play early on in his career on defense.
Yeah, I mean, with Schwesinger, I think I agree with you. Like, I don't think the plan was to have him be like a guy that was going to contribute a lot, but we also thought on draft night, like when that pick happened, we were all kind of like, yeah, this might not bode well for JOK. And then obviously we got the news during the summer that he was going on the pup list, and that would automatically shut down his 2025 season as he recovers from the neck injury. But Schwesinger is a guy that, really he did not play very much in his first 2 years, and then last year he broke out in a big way. Uh, at UCLA, was an incredible linebacker, great athlete, and obviously the Browns love what they saw out of him. It's interesting because it was only 1 year of extreme playing time, but I think he's got the tools to be a Swiss Army knife in that linebacker room. And much like Graham in the defensive tackle room, Anthony, Schwesinger might not have to be an impact guy day one because of how deep the linebacker room is, which we can get to. But he's got the tools where he can make an impact early on because he's great in all three phases, or he was at UCLA, and hopefully it translates to the next level in Cleveland.
Yeah, let's talk about this. The rest of this linebacking group. They have Hicks, Bush, and Baker to go along with Schwesinger at the moment, and that linebacker room. So, what are your? How do you think this is going to be a balance between these guys? Guys that are these veterans that are still pretty strong in this room, and how do you think they're going to be able to help Schwesinger come along here?
Yeah, I think he's got a chance to ease his way in. Like obviously it'll show with his skill set that he might not get to ease his way in, and he might just jump right in and be a guy that can make an impact instantly just because he's great. He's good in coverage. He's good as a run stopper, and he can even get after it a little bit in terms of the pass rusher. So we know the Browns like linebackers that do specific things. Obviously, JOK was the Swiss Army knife that can do it all, and maybe Schwesinger has that chance to be that guy. And you think if JOK can come back from this neck injury, you pair those two up for the next several years, like that's a good thing for this linebacking room. But right now, you mentioned Hicks, Bush, Baker. Obviously, Bush is a question mark because of his legal situations. You got to mention Mohamed Diabate and Winston Reed as well. That linebacker room has a ton of talent. It's going to be an interesting battle to see who will be the odd man out amongst that group, and Nathaniel Watson, who was a draft pick last year. So there's seven guys right there, and they typically only keep six. So one of those guys is going to get cut. So it'll be interesting to see for sure.
And with Bush and his legal situations, that could definitely be the odd man out, depending on how these things play out here. Um, you know, with the legal stuff. So, let's move over to offense, and we're going to skip past Judkins at the moment because as of right now, with his legal situation, we're just not going to include him in what our expectations are going to be. I'd imagine down the road there's probably going to be a suspension incoming for him, but we'll talk about him at a later time. But let's move on to the tight end that they took in the third round, Harold Fannin Jr. With the Browns talking about and Stefanski going back to more of the 12 personnel, getting a tight end was important. So as of right now, they have Njoku, they have Harold Fannin Jr. as your probably 1-2 guys in that tight end room. What are your expectations for Fannin as we head into the rookie season for him?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think back to what Harrison Bryant was. I think that's a good baseline to for Fannin because, you know, Bryant was he was 115th pick in the 2020 draft. And we remember his rookie season, like he made somewhat of an impact that rookie year in Cleveland. Like he was the third tight end behind Hooper and Njoku, but he got a ton of playing time. Played in 15 games. He had 24 catches, 238 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Granted, Fannin's going to be the number 2 here behind Njoku. So maybe you can uptick his production a little bit more. But I expect Fannin to be an impactful guy. Like, there was some buzz earlier this past week. Noah Fant gets cut by Seattle, and people were talking about potentially the Browns adding him as a third tight end. But I don't think they want to add anybody right now because I think they're high on Fannin. We saw a little bit of what Blake Whiteheart could do, and he could potentially be the third tight end. So like Fannin, I think is going to be a bit play a big part in this offense. Like you said, they're going back to 12 personnel. I think we will see it. We saw what Njoku did at the end of the 23 season with Flacco, and I think in a contract year, I think Njoku is going to be motivated to have another big production year, whether it's landing an extension with the Browns or him moving on and going somewhere else to get a big money payday. But I think Fannin will be a big part of this offense because of the uncertain situations in the wide receiver room outside of Jerry Jeudy. Um, I just expect Njoku and Fannin to be big time targets for whoever the quarterback ultimately becomes for the Browns offense.
Yeah, when you have questions at quarterback, and even if the rookies go out there, it seems to me like more so often than not, tight ends become the fallback guy, or those younger quarterbacks. So if they end up starting Shedeur or Dylan Gabriel, which we'll talk about here in a minute, I feel like these tight ends could really make an impact. And obviously, if we're going back to 12 personnel, having both of them out there at the same time, you know, these guys are going to be able to contribute not only in a blocking manner, but both of them are really good receiving tight ends as well. So if you are able to get these guys open, their athleticism is certainly going to be able to shine. As they go along the season.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, they're both big time body. They're big bodies. Both can be physical, obviously, because of their size. But there's the production that they both have. Njoku, what he's had in this offense, Fannin, what he did at Bowling Green last year, and hopefully it can translate somewhat to the NFL level. I don't think he'll put up the numbers he did at Bowling Green in Cleveland. I mean, it would be amazing if he did, but yeah, I think, and the fact that they can line up as receivers, Anthony. I think if Cedric Tillman doesn't really shine the way he did for that 3 game stretch last year, and Deontay Johnson flames out from another NFL team. Like, the tight ends are going to be so important, and the fact that they can motion them out to be receivers in certain, you know, offensive schemes and everything, like that bodes well for them to get a ton of targets and hopefully a ton of production as well for the tight end room.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of if I was listing quarterback targets on this team, Judy would be number one. Njoku would be number two. You could maybe make it a toss up in terms of Fannin and Deontay Johnson, number three, or Cedric
Or
Tillman, number
or
three.
Tillman.
So, I having your tight ends as your second and potentially third best receiving option, they're going to be able, I think, to create so many mismatches, especially if they do put Fannin out wide, if they do put Njoku out wide. Owners aren't going to be able to cover those guys with how big and physical they are. So they certainly have the athleticism to get open at that point. So I'm going to be very curious to see how Stefanski really utilizes these two tight ends who are extremely athletic and will be able to get open. And all they have to do at that point is catch the football, which has been a big question of Njoku at times. We haven't really, heard about that with Fannin. So I think if these guys are able to get open, they can certainly have big seasons this year. As we move along with the offense here, we talked about 12 personnel, and with 12 personnel comes the running game. The Browns have a new backfield in terms of the guys in that position. Obviously, we no longer have Nick Chubb signed with the Houston Texans in the offseason as a free agent. So unfortunately, we will miss Chubb. Um, but they still have Jerome Ford. They still have Pierre Strong. Drafted a pair of running backs, and the one that we're going to talk about right now is Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. I feel like there's definitely an opportunity here because I know what we've seen with Jerome Ford. I am not the biggest fan of him. I feel like he dances way too much and doesn't get to his position where he needs to be in terms of hitting that line of scrimmage quickly. I think he goes more lateral than north and south. Um, I think Judkins, when he comes back, and Sampson are guys, and even Pierre Strong too, are more your north south type runners that would be able to find those holes quickly. What do you think the plan is going to be here at running back with Dylan Sampson.
I mean, it's fascinating because obviously early reports, and I know it's the first day of camp, so you don't want to overreact to anything, but Jerome Ford's dealing with a minor injury. So right now Pierre Strong's getting the first team reps, which is interesting because he really hasn't, kind of made any eye-popping moves in his 2 seasons here in Cleveland, which is disappointing because I was had high hopes for him when we traded for him at the time. Um, but like Sampson, we talked about the running back class a lot during the pre-draft process, Anthony. He was one of those guys that if it was late day 2, day 3, guy, like he's one of those guys that was like a diamond in the rough potentially. And I still feel that way about him. Obviously the expectations probably changed for him in the wake of the Judkins situation. But I think it's clear right now they're going to make him, earn his reps, earn his carries. I don't think, if I had to guess, Pierre Strong's probably on the bubble right now. And maybe they're, trying to help him out for his NFL future. But I think at this point, you're looking at a committee of Ford and Sampson, which I feel like Ford can't be the 3 down caliber back in the league. I think he's best suited in a committee. We saw that in 23 with Kareem Hunt when he really, Ford had a solid year that year. And I think it was in part because he could lean on Hunt in certain situations and because Flacco targeted him in the passing game so much. And, hopefully, that's another guy in the passing game that we should talk about just because Ford was so effective in 2023 in that regard. But for Sampson, like obviously, like he won't get the brunt of the carries, but if he gets out there and he has a history of doing it in the zone scheme, um, he can be an impactful guy in this system. We've seen rookie backs in this system before, Isaiah Crowell and Terrence West back in 2014. Uh, they can they can make an impact, or Sampson can make an impact much like those guys can. Like this scheme has produced so many talented running backs. Think of Alfred Morris in 2012 in Washington with the Shanahans. Like Terrell Davis was a 6th round pick, and he turned into a Hall of Famer for Denver in this scheme. So this scheme has turned out running backs. Sampson was successful at it in the scheme in Tennessee. He's got the ability to be a big time player, and he's going to get his opportunities in the wake of the Judkins situation. And who knows, maybe by the end of the year, he surpasses Ford in terms of touches out of the backfield.
I definitely think that's a possibility in terms of him. Depending on what happens with Judkins here, if he ends up getting maybe the same suspension as Mike Hall last year, and he comes back, it could be pretty balanced. I think in the second half of the year in terms of touches. Uh, but I feel like more recent history in the NFL, the younger the running back, the more success it seems like they've had, especially in like years 1, 2, and 3. The shelf life of running backs isn't the greatest in terms of once they get to that second contract. But I feel like if you're going to make an impact here, years 1, 2, and 3, and year 4 last year of that rookie deal, these guys are going to be pretty good. And as long as the offensive line, which is a conversation for another day, holds up here, um, they had their bumps and bruises last year and did not play well. If this offensive line can really get back to form with this going back to 12 personnel and having those extra blockers out there, I feel like these running backs certainly have the opportunity to make a little bit of a dent into the production of this team.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the offensive line because that means so much to this running game. And, you know, the veterans on that line spoke out. They wanted to get back to this style of offense. They're getting back to it. You mentioned the injury bug caught them last year. It has caught them the last couple years, and this line's not getting any younger, especially Batonio, Treader, or not Treader, Batonio, Teller, and Conklin. Like they're getting up there. It's almost time that their Cleveland chapter closes. The questions with DeJuan Jones, and then obviously, who is it? I don't know, but the offensive line is so key to this running game. Like the running backs are talented, but if the offensive line can't stay steady and do what they need to do to get the holes open for those running backs, like it's all going to be a moot point, and this offense won't get back on track. So, Uh, I like what said. I think Sampson can be a guy that makes an impact on this offense this year in that running game. But it all comes down to that offensive line as well.
And now for the biggest question, which we probably saved the best one for last. And that is the quarterback situation. So the quarterback room currently consists of Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. How do we feel about these two rookies, Sanders and Gabriel, as we start training camp here? And what are your expectations and hopes of what they find out about these two guys this season?
So I'm torn. Obviously, as a Browns fan, I want to win, but I also want to see these guys. And I think it's it's hard to kind of make expectations for these guys because you want to win. So you hope Flacco or Pickett emerges out of camp and, starts off solid. And, one of these guys helps us get out of the gate. Like, kind of hope a 500 team at best. I wouldn't say at worst, at best through like the first 6 or 7 games. But you also want to be realistic when you look at the start of the schedule. So it's like my expectations for these guys is you expect to see them after the London game because I know a lot of people saying the London game would be the time to start them. I think after the London game, and even then, like you're playing Pittsburgh after London. So you kind of want to just wait until maybe the bye week. So I'm hoping by coming out of the bye week, we see one of these rookies because I feel like you need at least 8 games, whether it's a mixture of the both of them or one of them emerges and just, starts the second half of the year. You need to see some kind of evaluation and a solid evaluation on these quarterbacks because we have 2 first round picks next year. If we're in a situation where we're in a spot to draft a quarterback in the first round next year, I think you need to have a clear cut evaluation on either Gabriel and or Shedeur Sanders. So my hope is if we're in a situation at the bye week where it's time to make a change, then you make that change. Whether it's Gabriel, whether it's Sanders, I I certainly have a preference. I want to see Shedeur Sanders just because I am not sold on Dylan Gabriel completely as an NFL quarterback the way I am on Shedeur Sanders. But my hope is come the bye week, if we're not in a situation where we're threatening for a playoff spot, Anthony, that we see these rookies over the second half of the year and we have a clear cut evaluation on them.
It's certainly going to be interesting how Stefanski and crew navigate this whole quarterback room. I don't know if they're going to go into the season with all four. That's not something I don't think they've done. So, are you going to move on from Flacco? Are you going to move on from Pickett after the preseason and, go in with one of those guys and then Gabriel and Sanders? And then, the thing is like, what happens if one of those guys get hurt week one? Flacco, then you're starting Gabriel or Sanders week two. You know, that's obviously not a situation that they want to be in. So I'm very curious how they're going to navigate this entire quarterback room. I feel like my personal thought is I think Pickett is going to start week one, and I've thought that for a while. And maybe he turns into what Sam Darnold was in Minnesota. He was a first round quarterback, so there is talent there. He had some moments in Pittsburgh. Some of them weren't the best moments, but the thing that stood out in Pittsburgh is that when it came down to end of game situations, he did just enough to help his team win. And I know that's the story of the Steelers for like ever. They're able to always do like just enough to win the football game. Whether it's their defense or their offense, like it's always a team effort, and they're just able to do uh, like the bare minimum to win. And it's so disgusting each time that it happens. But um, I feel like there's a, a place for him to start and see what they have in hopes of being that reclamation project. And then from there, if something happens to him, I would put Flacco in at that point, and then Gabriel and Sanders, you can figure that out. But I feel like Pickett's going to start, and they're going to give him every opportunity to maybe be that reclamation quarterback guy, and see what he has. Now, problem with that is we know how this fan base operates, right? We know that first interception at home, they're going to be calling for Shedeur. Like they're going to skip over Gabriel. I feel like just because of the popularity with Shedeur Sanders. That first incomplete pass. It's going to be very tricky how this whole situation is navigated by Stefanski and the Browns. So it's going to be an interesting process that plays out here as we go throughout the season.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, just looking at the situation now in training camp, like today on Wednesday, Flacco did get got 0, 11 on 11 reps. He didn't need to because he's familiar with the offense. And you want to see everybody else. You want to get an evaluation of everybody else. We know what Joe Flacco is at this point, because he's been in the league for so long. I'm I said Flacco back after the draft was going to be the starter. You can just read through the tea leaves, Anthony. I think they want Pickett to succeed. Maybe they're doing this to boost his trade value and to get a team that needs a quarterback potentially in a month's time to trade an asset for Pickett. But I kind of feel like they feel like he can be their Sam Darnold potentially. And so they'll probably move on from Flacco. That's not going to be a popular move. So that's going to be another strike on Stefanski and Barry. And, a lot of people want them out of town. And maybe they will be at the end of the season if things don't go well. But I'm with you. I think Pickett starts at least the beginning of the season. And then we will get through the London game and maybe the Pittsburgh game and maybe the game before the bye week against the Dolphins. Maybe that's when we see Dillon, Gabriel, or Shedeur Sanders make their NFL debut. It seems like you can read through the tea leaves. They're high on Gabriel and the way he's been able to pick up the offense and stuff. It's going to be interesting to see here in the next couple weeks at the joint practices, the preseason games, how much Sanders has made improvements, because that was one of the things, him getting accustomed to the playbook, the offense, and everything. It will be interesting to see how he commands that out on the field with preseason and the joint practices if he gets the opportunity to showcase. But yeah, we need to evaluate to see how these guys are. Because if we go into 2026 and we have, let's say, 2 top 10 picks and we're in position to draft a quarterback, but people are going to be making the case like we didn't see enough of Gabriel or Sanders, specifically Sanders, just because he's the fan favorite already. Uh, it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And obviously, that's a long time from now. But, these two quarterbacks, I think, are going to be the focal point of the 2025 season, because I feel like at the end of the day, that's the one big thing everybody wants to see is, will one of these guys emerge as the potential franchise quarterback for the Cleveland Browns?
All right, let me ask you one final question before we get on out of here. In your personal opinion, is there any chance that either Dylan Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders starts week 1?
I will say no, but much like Kevin Stefanski, I have the right to change my opinion later.
That is fair. I
Because
I guess
I
we'll
mean,
see.
let's just call it for what it is right now, real quick. It seems I don't think this is a four-way competition the way some of people have made it out to be. I think it's a two-man competition between Flacco and Pickett, and I don't even know if it's that, because I just feel like they want to see Kenny Pickett, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's a way they keep all four quarterbacks. I doubt it, but it's just I feel like it's going to be one of the veterans, and the other one moves on, and then the rookies will sit back and wait until it's their time.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how this is all going to shake out. Certainly something we'll be keeping an eye on as training camp moves on. Once we get those reports from the joint practices and all of that, we'll have a clearer picture. I feel like those will give us more of a clear picture than the actual preseason games were. It just kind of seems how that trend's been going over the last few years with these joint practices. So I'm excited to see what comes out of those against Philly and Carolina when they get those practices in, to find out who the starting quarterback is going to be week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals. Um, you know, we've had some luck against the Bengals the last handful of years, so that's certainly an opportunity to win, especially because they've started out bad the last few years. It seems like they get off to a slow start, so it's definitely an opportunity to come home with the win in week 1. It's just a matter of who is going to be starting for the Cleveland Browns at that point. All right, we're gonna get out of here. We're gonna be back soon with another episode, and I'm not sure. I'm sure we'll have a few things to discuss. As training camp moves along here, we keep getting these news bites that come out and reports. So stay tuned to the Dawgland here on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you get your information, and wherever you listen to us. We appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to whichever platform you use. And until next time, always remember, go Browns.